Thank you. So this is supposed to be like a hurricane eye or something. This is the best I can do with Photoshop, but just to show the swirl of media that we deal with. So in 3 to 5 minutes, I'll give you a quick overview of some things I looked up on media and the coverage and consumption of climate science. So the first 2 slides deal more with the coverage, and then the last slide deals with our consumption.
Can I just put this up here?
Sure, Mayor. So, nope, that's all right. There we go. Okay. All right, so slide 1. Now, I thought it was important, and I think I want to make this little note here, but it's really contained all this. I tried to cite university researchers from the University of Colorado, because I think a lot of people don't realize how much university research factors in their everyday lives, their products they buy, the things they do. I think it's very important. So I try to stick with that at least on one of these. So I like the Center for Science and Technology Policy Research, International Collective on Environment, Culture, Politics. Also, acronym ICECAPS. I thought that was clever from the University of Colorado. So since 2004, Oceania or South Pacific has led the world in climate science coverage in newspapers. And why would that be? They seem to be, at least in their media, part of the world that is feeling the effects of climate science. So when you go back and you look across the world, the different regions of the world where it's being covered, this is, and it's by a mile, that where climate science is being covered in this part of the world. Concerns of heat, effect on the population, the real concern of threat of global warming, so different, the usual things you hear. So U.S. coverage peaks, the peaks of U.S. coverage coincide 2012, 2008, 10, and 16. So what do you have in 2008 and 16 that the spike in the coverage of climate science would coincide with? It's election years. And the same was in 12, but it was really peaked in these 2 years, most recent in 2008. Europe is a consistent leader. New York Times has consistently reported war on climate science, and that's related to the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, a lot of the major newspapers around the country. The New York Times is leading that group. So how broadcast networks cover climate change? From 2014 to 15, there's a difference, and they based this on minutes. And what was really surprising to me is the top network that covered climate science was, for the total of a year, was 205 minutes. So I think of that and I think, that's not a lot of time. But when you think of broadcast television, that is a long time, because you're talking about a 30-minute news show that is dedicating maybe a minute and a half segments to a story. So if you break it down that way, it is quite a significant portion of their time.
Chris,
So,
excuse me,
yes,
is that both radio and TV?
That's just television. It's just the major networks.
So would that include Hannity, who, along with Rush Limbaugh, says climate science is fraud, a hoax?
Well, what this includes,
on
and
radio, really.
and this does not include radio, but it's CBS, ABC, NBC, and Fox. So Fox is going to cover, they're going to cover a lot of the shows that fall within those networks. But you can see the combined change in climate coverage from 2014 to 2015, despite landmark actions to address global warming, decreased a little bit. Higher percentage of climate change coverage occurred on nightly news shows. And why nightly news shows? They're more watched, more viewed than in the morning. In the morning is when we're listening to our radio, getting ready for work. We might have a cup of coffee and read the paper. We might watch television, but most likely we have a newspaper or the radio in our cars. NBC increased coverage by 3 minutes in 2015. Doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. But Fox increased by 20 minutes. Now, what was interesting there is in 2014, Fox was way down here. So they increased and only came in third. So they increased by 20 minutes, the most of any network, yet still came in third. So it shows how little Fox covered climate change in 2014. So again, nightly news, more viewers, increase in Fox coverage, trailed all networks in 2014, but passed only ABC in 2015. ABC kind of stayed consistent. So I want to go just to some of my thoughts on this and just my view of the media, how I follow the media. When I follow Twitter, when I get my news from Twitter or other social media, I'm not just reading the news, I'm paying attention to the patterns. And I don't always just read about climate science, I read about many other topics as well. But you start recognizing patterns and trends. So is there a bias in reporting? Any of us in an election season have friends on Facebook, you read that there's biases in reporting. And you hear this all the time. So let's use politics as a barometer for this. And that's where everybody talks about the bias. So perception versus reality. And do our perceptions lend to reality? And I think a lot of times what we believe and what we see turns into being real. We believe it's talking ourselves into something. Or we have a predetermined idea and belief that we focus on a network that supports that. The network that doesn't support it is biased, right? So that we kind of talk ourselves into, we have our own beliefs. If you go back to, go to the bottom, next to the last line, publics no longer look to news for education, rather validation of the belief. This is my opinion. Because you go back to the days of CBS, NBC, ABC, you had the basic, that's where everyone got their news and were educated. You're no longer educated on the nightly news. You're seeking a validation. So you're watching now your networks. You may watch CNN for one validation. You watch it and you go, yes, yes, that is exactly what I believe. Then you flip over to Fox and you say, that's crap. This is wrong, that's wrong, and you start yelling at the TV. You'll start to turn into my dad and my grandfather yelling at the TV. And vice versa. So people who watch Fox News are getting their beliefs validated. And then so that's where that bias comes in. And so over the course of time, Walter Cronkite, Edward R. Murrow, all of these legends of broadcasting were educating us and telling us a story because that was the first shot we had at the news. You are now, you have news 24/7. And some of the news is, Ron and I were talking coming in, where's that line between the traditional journalism that is taught to people, to journalists, and then you have bloggers and you have the fringe sites that are either far left, far right reaching, and people are now looking at those as fact and validation for what they're consuming. So it is increasingly difficult to affect views through the news anymore. Used to go to the movie theater, think back before television, you go to the movie theater to get the news from the war front. Before the movies, you get that news reel. And that was how and what you consumed is that's all you had. And now we've got so many different opinions and we're able to share our own. So it's very difficult to affect people's views. You can look at the latest, again, use politics as a barometer. Everything that's going on with emails right now. There was a survey conducted that said, that doesn't really change my opinion. I'm going to vote for her. And so even the news that comes out as however it's intended, whatever the intention is not going to have that big of an effect anymore. So is reality driven by public expectation and our networks cater to a specific audience? I think, to me, that's what we've evolved to. And that's what we see in the coverage of climate science. And you look at, and I'm stating the obvious here, you look at one network is going to, they may ask questions, but it's either going to be right down the middle or very supportive. You have another network that's going to ask questions, but going to lean the other way very hard. And when you go back to election years, you can look at those trends and see where those spikes are. And I wish I couldn't capture the graph, but you can see the spike in 2008. And it did this. 2010 was, I think, the UN Conference on Climate Change. So it spiked again. And then in 2016, it's up again. So it's always become a talking point during these times of year. With that, I'll stop. Let someone else speak. Any questions?